Hello and welcome to the second part of this tutorial on actions and droplets. So in the first part we have looked at how to set up the contrast adjustment using levels and curves and how to set it up correctly with the correct auto settings. So it will make a good job of running through this automated action. So in this one we're going to go again through setting up the levels and the curves adjustments. We're going to do it a little bit quicker, and then we're going to look at the creating the action and the droplet and how to set that up in Photoshop. So if you remember from the first step, then we start by creating a levels layer and just applying an auto to it. So first, before we do that, we're going to start recording the action. So actions, I always describe them if you've ever worked in Excel, or similar to macros. So we're just going to record everything we do, and then we can play it back on any image we want. And that's why it's important that it's just a general update and not specific, not that we do any work specific to this image. So in the action menu here, so depending on whether you've used this before or not, it might differ on how your actions look. At the moment we're in button mode, and that's why you have all these different color options. So in order to create an action, you need to turn off button mode. So we do that by clicking on the flyout menu in the actions panel, and you see button mode is checked, so we want to uncheck it. And now this changes to this panel here. So from here we want to start recording an action. First we have to create a new action, and we do that with this little square box with the plus inside it. We'll click here to create a new action, and then we want to give the action a name. So in this case we can, if we want, we can just call it contrast. And we can leave it in the default actions. You can set up different categories here too as well. You can assign it a function key as well if you want, if it's an action that you feel you're going to be using a lot. So if for instance I can use F2 shift control, so we're not going to assign this any function key, and you can also assign it a color, so in button mode it stands out, so you can click on it. So we can assign this violet and click record. So once I click record, anything I do in Photoshop will be recorded. So it's important that we only perform the actions that we're going to do in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on record, and now I'm going to start creating my action. And if you remember, the first thing we did here was to create the levels, the auto levels adjustment. So I'm going to come down and click on the adjustment levels in the layer panel and go to levels, and I'm just going to hit auto here. That's all I'm going to do, and that's it. So the next thing I'm going to do is just turn this off and select the background layer and go to the channel tab in the panel, and I'm going to control click on RGB. That selects all my highlights. So from there I'm going to go back to layers, and now I'm going to create a curves adjustment. And I'm going to select a point here in the center. So I want it to be, it should be just 50-50, and we'll leave it that way. And then we're going to make a copy of this. So first of all, I'm going to name this highlight. So just double click on where it says curves and name that H for highlights. And then I'm going to make a copy of this by dragging and dropping it onto the new layer icon. And I'm going to call this shadows. And we need to invert the layer mask. So I need to click on the layer mask, and I'm going to go to the image menu, adjustments, and then invert, or control I as well. I'm just going to change these layer masks, so just going to tighten them up a little bit. So I'm going to go to do that. We're just going to go to image, adjustments, levels, and we're just going to change this so it doesn't affect too many of the midtones. So we're going to select 75 here to tighten that up, and this one as well, image, adjustments, levels and this one, just so it doesn't reach too far into the shadows. We'll go 75 as well and click on OK. Okay, so now I've got my shadow and highlight adjustment. What you can do is you can do an initial change to these if you want, so to add a tiny bit of contrast. So if I click on my little point here for the shadows, I can drag this upwards. So maybe I want to make this 55, and then for the highlights, we can brighten the highlights up a little bit, so we can drag this down to 45. So you can see it's just a subtle change initially, and then it can be adjusted afterwards more. And I'm going to turn my levels layer now back on, and I'm going to put these in a group. So you need to select all 3 layers, and then you need to go to the layer menu and group layers, or Control G is the shortcut for it. And we're just going to call that contrast and hit enter. Okay, so that's the adjustment. We've recorded our actions now, so we can go back to the actions panel, which I can pull out here, and we can stop recording. So our action is now recorded. So if we go into button mode, we can see our contrast action is here. So if I go ahead and delete this adjustment that we made, I go ahead and delete that, and then I click on my contrast action, it will go through and create my action nicely here, and that can be applied to any image. And then once you've created it, you can come back in here and you can darken the shadows or brighten the highlights as you wish. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is create a droplet from this action. So in order to create a droplet, then we're going to do that from the menu in Photoshop. You can also do this in Bridge as well. So we go to Automate, so File, Automate, and then Create Droplet. And we want to choose where the droplet is going to be created. So I'm going to create it in this folder where I have my images. And I'm going to call the droplet contrast, and I'm going to save it in that folder. So the action is already selected, the one that I'm going to create it from here. So in the default action set, and it's the one called contrast. So override action opens. So we want to leave that disabled, because we want Photoshop to by default open it. If I disable this, it means there's an action. We've put an open action into the action we're creating, which we haven't. So I'm going to leave that disabled. Include all subfolders, so you can drop folders of images onto your droplet, and it'll process everything in that folder. And you can also specify if you want subfolders included as well. I'm going to leave that unchecked. It's a good idea to suppress file open options dialogues, and also to suppress color profile warnings, because if you're processing 10, 20, 30 images and one of them has a profile warning, it'll stop on that one. So when you're gone away to get your cup of coffee or a cup of tea and you come back, it won't have completed the job for you. So errors, stop for errors, or you can choose to have it log the errors to a file, so you can check them afterwards, and then you can choose the location of that file. I'm going to leave stop for errors on for the moment. Where you wanted to save the images, so I'm going to choose a folder. So save and close will just overwrite the original image, which we don't really want. If you select none, then that means that you should have a save and close action in your action, which we don't have. So I'm going to choose folder. I'm going to choose folder here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it contrast. And that's the folder we're going to use to send the adjusted image to. So I don't want to override save as commands, because I don't have a save as command embedded in my action, so we need to leave that unchecked. And then the naming convention for your file, so the document name, so the original file name, then I want a 2-digit serial number, so every file to be called 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and so on. And it's going to start at 1, as you know, notice here. And then the extension, which in this case could be a PSD, a TIFF, or JPEG, whatever type of file you're working on. Of course, I always recommend when you're doing adjustments that you work on a 16-bit TIFF file. So this file here is a 16-bit, it's a PSD file actually, and it's also got a color workspace of ProPhoto RGB, which is what I recommend for when you're doing your editing. So we're ready to create a droplet now. I'm going to click on OK. My droplet has now been saved. So we can take a look at where the droplet is and then drop this file on it. I'm going to close this file without saving it. So here we see our droplet contrast. Here we have our PSD file. So by taking that file and simply drop it on our droplet, Photoshop opens, processes the file, and it should save and close the file. Of course, it takes a few moments to process through this, and then we go to our contrast folder and we can open up this file in Photoshop, and we can see here it is with our action applied to it. So we have our layers here as we just created them. So that's actions and droplets. Very handy, very useful to use if you've got a particular type of workflow that you apply to every image. Of course, remember, it has to be just a general adjustment and not anything specific to a certain image. So no, cloning, no adjusting certain elements in the image, just a general overall adjustment that you can apply to any image. All right, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for watching.